Hey, Bob, at the beginning this morning, Larry's going to make a very short call encouraging people to write to LRB and telling them to stop for safety science research.
No, that's fine. No. Well, I take it back. Ordinarily, I
Larry Rosello. Go on up here. You can stop giving out the paper. Just come up here and give your spiel.
Okay, so welcome. This is a great crowd for week one. Glad you could all be here. Many of you may know about the Office of Management and Budget and its new rules for funding science. Basically, it says that scientific review panels can offer opinion, but the politicians don't have to follow it. It's all political based, whether the grant gets funded or not. Oh, okay. So the bottom line with Office of Management and Budget is they want politicians to decide if grants conform to the president's agenda and fulfill what they consider to be the public interest. You can comment on this rule up until July 13th. You can write a commentary based on your experiences. And maybe more important, you can send your commentary to your legislators. My legislator just called me yesterday and asked if she could quote from my commentary that I submitted to the Federal Register. So submit it to the Federal Register, but also to your congresspeople, because it arms them with information that they can use to fight this rule. And remember that municipalities and states apply for grants. They'll be screened by the same filter. Your services are as high as they are, and your taxes are minimized to the extent they are because of federal grants. And now, if your state, my state of Connecticut, for example, Trump has no use for us, and our chance of getting a federal grant is much diminished under these rules. So this sheet, which I passed out to some of you, it's also in the back for you to pick up, has information. It has a website where you can be coached in how to write a commentary. It has advice specific for business people, specific for scientists, specific for public that are interested in this topic. So you have some sense of what you need to do. There's a link that gives a summary of the 440 pages. I think it's 2 or 3 page summary of the 440-page document. It has my email address if you have questions. And also, if you're interested in hearing, participating in a Zoom call with Rosa DeLauro, the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, on how this bill affects your town and your pocketbook, and also gives more information about how you might submit a commentary. The deadline is July 13th, and I hope you'll all take this seriously. Go to the website, see how you might actually have something to say, whether you're a scientist or not. You've got something to say. Okay, thank you, Bob.
Okay, Mark, I think you're up next. You want to make an announcement now? We'll get the announcements going, and then we'll go with the speaker.
Yeah, I just want to say hi. I'm Mark Wensler. I direct the Climate Change Initiative here at Chautauqua, and I'm pleased to partner once again this year in the Chautauqua Science Group talks. So this is a great way to kick us off. Thank you, Terry, for being here. We also have another science-focused program this afternoon at 12:30 at Smith Wilkes Hall. Gretchen Goldman, who's the CEO of the Union of Concerned Scientists, will be speaking again 12:30 today at Smith Wilkes Hall. And that's it. Back to you, Bob.
So finally, without ado, or any further ado, we introduce the scientist of the day, Dr. Terry Gordon, who's also a personal friend, so what I say may not be relevant. He's a professor of environmental medicine at New York University School of Medicine. He holds a BS in physiology and MS in toxicology, and a PhD also in toxicology from MIT. He served on ad hoc member of several review panels, National Institutes of Health, National Coalition for Cancer Research, Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. He's past chair of the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists Threshold Limit Value Committee, and his basic research interest is inhalation toxicology. In order to give him time to talk, since we have so many other introductions, I'm just going to ask Terry to come up here and do his thing. Dr. Terry Gordon.
So what that guy said, if you ever want to take time to write something, having reviewed grants for funding and having the idea of politicians coming in and making decisions after we spent hours and hours reviewing grants, if it wasn't so sad, I would laugh. Do what you can, take those couple minutes. Thank you. So my talk today, and for that I'm going to take off my Science Cafe and put on my MAGA hat. Make America Green again. The title of the talk is, Are We Becoming Plastic People? Bob chose that title, I think, not me. That's working. So feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'm continuing in research, I'm trying to retire, but microplastics, it's fun, it's impactful, so I'm staying in the game for that. So interrupt me whenever you like. So plastics, you guys know they're everywhere, from bottles, they're actually in tires, wrapping your grapes in the grocery store, your carpets, your electronics. So they're everywhere, and they can be a problem. As you can imagine, the production of global plastics has gone up from almost nothing after World War II to now, well, 2019. So industries, and I try not to compare the plastic industry to the tobacco industry, but there are some parallels in how pushy they are putting plastics into our lives. So synthetic material, that's what it is. I have to do these definitions. It's made from organic polymers, not organic like you might get at the grocery store, organic meaning carbon-based. Bakelite was probably the first thing in '07, and that was, I do remember Bakelite, plastic, electric insulators. The good things about plastics, which we all do enjoy, low density, resistance, conduction, and heat, water and corrosion resistant. It's pretty malleable, and it's very cheap to produce. So, as I said, production ramped up circa World War II because they wanted to have more lightweight stuff, not use the natural resources like metals. But is it a global problem? And yes, and half of the world's plastics are made in Asia. About half of that half is China. And this just shows, this would be, wow, this is very far away. Well, the main things to get from this slide is that each one of these colors represents a category of plastic use, and that big one at the bottom is packaging. So packaging makes up the majority of our use, and you can see that over the years, the decades, each category has increased dramatically, and pretty much in parallel. So what I'm going to talk about today is what are plastics, what are micro nanoplastics, which is the catch-all term people use now, how they're measured, and what health effects are known about micro nanoplastics, and what's left for researchers to figure out. So plastics is an umbrella term. I can't apologize, but it's very small. So left to right, in the upper part, you see the recycling codes, 1 to 7, but there's things that all make up plastic. The polyethylene, terephtalates, the high-density polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, which is in your sewer pipes, low-density polyethylene for bottles, polypropylene, polystyrene for packaging, and then tons of others, different plastics. So there's 10 billion tons of plastic out there, thousands and thousands of subtypes, and typically classified, as I just said, by chemical structure. What's that monomer that gets cross-linked to make that plastic? And there's also physical and chemical properties such as density, heat, resistance, and the hardness, which are important when you're making those products, like a milk bottle out of high-density polyethylene or polypropylene, which hopefully we no longer use for our water bottles. And then there's additives to give different properties to these plastics. There's a life cycle of plastics. Unfortunately, the key from this slide, which you can't see, is that at the bottom, pretty much less than 10% of plastics really gets recycled efficiently. Because in plastic breakdown, it takes 10 to 1,000 years. Thermal, UV light, mechanical degradation. So if you think about it, the plastic bag from the grocery store, it degrades in 20 years. A plastic bottle, over 400 years. Now the concept, and when I saw this slide, the concept of decomposition, degradation is unclear. It's not always referring to the chemical degradation. So, you know, if food degrades, it really degrades. But plastics, often this is just the mechanical degradation, and it's becoming microplastics. And to me, that's not quite degraded, yes.
You said recycling plastic is only about 10%?
Yes.
Why is it so low? Lack of community programs? Or,
Mostly money. Oh, yes. So he asked, why is recycling so low at less than 10%? And it's predominantly because of money. There's no incentive, impetus for people to really take the plastics and put it back into the life cycle of the next plastic. But no, it's a good question. Bad answer. So microplastics production, these are publications, excuse me. So the publications of microplastics going up almost exponentially over the last 10 years because everybody is interested in them. So the key question is to me and to be asking yourself is, should we be concerned with the toxicity of the monomers that are making up plastic and get cross-linked and give it its properties, or should we be more concerned about the plastic nanoparticles? So if it's the monomers, and there's always cross-linking agents, vinyl chloride, liver carcinogen, it's in polyvinyl chloride, the phthalates, bisphenol, which you all know from the news, and styrene, polystyrene, another liver toxin. So these are all concerns if they get released. The micronanoplastics, you got to ask yourself, are they inert? Now, when plastic particles came onto the research scene 10 years ago, my partner in crime, Lung-Chi Chen, and I, should we do it? And we sort of said no, because we actually back then, plastic particles were inert, and we used them in our studies when we wanted to look at cellular function in the lung. So we thought they were inert, they're okay. I don't think so now. So other key question is, how do these microplastic particles travel through the body? And that's probably what I think about the most, because it's totally absurd how they do this. And then you got to ask yourself, plastic particles, and that's what we hear about, that's what's the news, but in fact, fibers are probably out there in higher quantities. Think clothes, laundry. So micro nano-sized particles, someone gave the definition of microplastics, any fragment that's less than 5 millimeters in length, sort of like a sesame seed. And nanoplastics, with the word nano, are following the same thing as nanoparticles in the ambient air. So anything less than 100 nanometers is considered to be a nanoplastic particle, which is about the same size as an antibody or a virus. But the microplastics at 5 millimeters is, in terms of what I think about in entering the body, it's enormous. So this is another slide that, again, it's tough to see. So typically when you're looking for microplastics in the environment, someone did a study looking at the national parks or wilderness areas in the western US. And you take a clean filter, like on the upper left, you collect particles from the air for a day or so, it gets dark. But what is microplastic and what is just regular ambient combustion fuel, fossil fuel particles? And what they found is that from the Grand Canyon all the way down to the Bryce Canyon, the metric tons, when they did visual counts, ended up to be between 0.2 and 12 metric tons of plastic settling or in the air each year. And then they actually did some chemistry, because when you do a visual count, and this is one of the things that bugs me, visual counts, you can only see particles that are micron or several micron in size. But they did some FTIR, Fourier transform infrared chemical analysis, and they got about the same thing. So they both said the same range of metric tons of plastics in the wilderness. That's metric tons settled. I'm pretty sure this is settled metric tons. Over the entire Grand Canyon for a year, it's about 12 metric tons. Over that area. You can't see it, but it gives the size of Grand Canyon of 4,900 kilometers squared. It's that whole area. That's how many metric tons. So is that an alarming amount? I'll get to that. It is. It's an alarming amount, but I do have my biases, which is this. So I'm going to list my biases about microplastics. So the majority of our exposure, to me, is via the oral route, not the inhalation route. Going to the last question, and I will cover that. So in this study, which hit the news in the media about the popular press about a year and a half ago, it was about nanoplastics in bottled water, which I'm sure everybody has drunk and passed, hopefully. So they did a rapid single particle chemical imaging analysis, and they observed 240 to 400,000 nanoplastic particles per liter of bottled water. And what I'm going to be telling you is that that's way more than the last question, like what is in the air. So that's how much they found. And what they did in this study is they took multiple bottles of 3 different brands, and I blew it up for here. And so the take-home message here, there's differences in this. I think the blue is polyethylene, and the purple is that terephthalate polyethylene. So you can see that between these 3 different brands of bottled waters, when they looked at the nanoparticles, they found the brands were different as far as the major component of those nanoparticles. And remember, this is the nanoparticles in the water, not the bottle. But the other take-home to me is, you see these in this pie chart, there's a half a dozen or so other plastics in the water. So either they make the bottles out of multiple plastics and particles are leaching off, or, which I think it probably is, there's particles in our water. So even though these companies say they filter, maybe they're not filtering out all the plastic or other particles that it's in the water, whatever their water source is. So my second bias, our water supplies are probably quite contaminated with micro nanoplastics, or that the bottlers' filtering systems aren't quite up to snuff. Or in fact, the filtering systems could contribute to the plastic particles. Often they put in resins. The guy over there could tell us what it means, but they put in plastic resins to get the ions out, and those could be contributing to plastics. So for my bias, I wanted to figure out, so I'm going to calculate the water burden from micro nanoplastics. So I had to know how many liters per day, X liters a day you drink, and then how many micro nanoplastics per liter. So I just said we drink 3 liters per day, and I said 300,000 plastic particles per liter, and that's only the micro nanoplastics. They did not measure the bigger stuff. So we're ingesting almost 1 million plastic particles per day just from drinking, if you drink bottled water. Tap water, thankfully, is less. If you go with the same 3 liters a day, tap water measurements are down in the tens of thousands particles per liter, so we're ingesting probably 1/10 if using just tap water. This is sounding all very negative. I'm sorry.
When I first heard all this on the news, I thought the bottles were degrading, and that's how the plastic was getting in the water. But you're saying it's in the
So
water first?
the question, don't know. Don't know if it's the bottles degrading or if the particles were in there in the first place. That's not clear to me yet.
There was a lady here a couple of years ago who was measuring from Lake Erie to getting these numbers, but he said that the 100,000 micro nanoparticles per day was only 100,000. Do you really consider that to be better than 1 million particles a day?
Yes. As a toxicologist, dose makes the poison. He asked, is 100,000 really better than 1 million particles per day? It is relative, yes.
We're talking about bottled water, but really we're talking about any liquid you drink from a plastic bottle, right?
Yes.
So if you're drinking a Pepsi from a Gatorade or an energy drink, as long as it's the plastic bottle that's more the worry, right? I mean, they're getting the same water probably, the Pepsi plant is using the same water in their water bottle as they are in their Pepsi product, and they're putting it in the same type of bottle.
You hear that, Linda? I agree completely. And in fact, because these are carbonated, that means the pH is low, acid, probably even more monomers would be coming off as well as particles. I have not seen someone do that. I do have a colleague in Taiwan who measured plastic particles coming off of tea bags, but I haven't seen someone do. Now, actually, I'm hoping because most of the soft drink makers, they really do filter the heck out of their water. Yes?
What about something like a Brita filter? So that's filtering things out, but a Brita filter is plastic.
So a Brita filter is plastic. The container is plastic. You're absolutely right. The material that's inside, I think some of it's activated charcoal. There could be deionizers, which would be resin beads, which are plastic. And then there's probably a HEPA filter to get rid of real plastics. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's the ingestion burden for micro nanoplastics? Different bottles probably have different numbers of the particles. I haven't even touched on food. And then as an inhalation guy, I think of inhaling as one thing, but particles have to get deposited and then they get cleared. So same thing with ingestion. You drink it or you eat it, particles go in the GI tract. Do they get cleared? And where do they clear to? Do they clear to other tissues in our body, which isn't a great thing, or do they get out into urine and feces, hopefully? So the dermal route of exposure, that's hitting the media now, as well as the scientific press. And that's my third bias, is the dermal route contribution to our body burden of micro nanoplastics is probably really low. I can't imagine. It's pretty hard for particles to get through the skin. I mean, it's the barrier. Much different when you're talking about the epithelial lining, the lungs, or the GI tract. So inhalation exposure. So as I sort of hinted at, indoor fibers are the most common airborne plastic particles. Coming off your carpet, your clothes, laundry. Indoor micro nanoplastics have higher concentrations than outdoors, makes sense. It's important because we spend about 90% of our time indoors. So I wanted to calculate the inhalation exposure to plastic particles. We inhale about 10 cubic meters per day, and there's been measurements of 10 fibers per cubic meter. So we inhale 100 to 1,000 micro nanoplastic particles, at least fibers per day. Outdoor air, it ranges, but I've seen similar concentrations outdoors. So then there's articles like this from past January. Direct measurements reveal extreme concentrations of plastics in urban atmospheres. And they found 10 to the 5th and particles in these two cities in China, and nanoplastics that was total particles, and nanoplastics were abundant, reaching 10 to the 4th particles, almost 10 to the 5th particles per cubic meter. Remember, we inhale 10 cubic meters a day, so. So they use the word extreme in the popular press article, but similar wording in the scientific article. So I wanted to calculate it. Again, we inhale X cubic meters per day, and what's times the concentration of micro nanoplastics in the air. So if you say that there's 10 to the fourth or 10 to the fifth plastic particles per cubic meter, ambient PM, it's generally about 10 to the third particles per cc, per ml. And 10 to the third particles per cc is 10 to the sixth per liter, or 10 to the ninth ambient particles that we're inhaling all the time per cubic meter of air. That's a really good question. What's an ambient particle? It's whatever's put out there. It could be from tires, it could be from industrial sources, fossil fuel combustion probably makes up half of it. So we're comparing 10 to the ninth particles out there in the air normally, and this is a particle count compared to the plastic particle measurements that say there's orders and orders of magnitude less plastic particles. So personally, I'm not worried. So you might inhale 70,000 plastic particles per day and billions of regular particles. And luckily, our lungs are made to handle particles and get rid of them to a limit. So to me, my bias is the risk to health from airborne plastic particles is low, and it's probably way overblown by some media and some scientists. So, two concerns in micro nanoplastics. Are they in our bodies? So you can measure it in excretion products pretty easily, blood, feces, urine, and then you got to measure it in tissues, which is tougher. And this is recorded for YouTube, so if people want to actually see the slides, okay. But measuring plastic particles is hard, it's very hard. The current home method that you see advertisements for, send in your blood sample, it's pretty bogus to us. Typically, we're using hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment to get a measurement that is already a little bit uncertain. And then there's complications in measurements. What type of plastics, so many of them, and then what size. For example, I'll show you an example where we're using one chemistry method to look at particles, but we can only use that method on the particles we can see under a microscope, which is limited in size and is usually several microns. So what you measure and how you measure depends on size. So toxicity, is the particle toxic? Do chemicals leach out, and are they what are causing toxicity? Inhalation, air pollution guy, we always wonder if the particle toxicity is size dependent. The particle affects where it goes in the body, and particle size, small particles, nano-sized particles have a much bigger surface area per mass concentration. So we always wonder about that. And how can we accurately measure the toxicity of relevant micro nanoplastics? So bias number 5, measuring micro nanoplastics in tissues is really, really, really hard. So it's a problem. Luckily, RFK Jr. and the EPA administrator are going to fund a $100+ million effort to try and enhance our ability to measure plastics in the body and look at the toxicity. So the problems, well, in chemical analysis, there's contamination during sampling, storage, analysis. For instance, we've gotten autopsy samples that have been stored in plastic containers for 5 years before they throw them out. How did they get them? Well, they always cut them on a plastic board because they don't want to ruin their scalpels, et cetera, et cetera. So again, as I said, there's method bias on the size and the polymer type, and the analytical methods vary greatly. So any chemists, engineers out there, we need help on this. Typically, a tissue sample gets digested in potassium hydroxide, sometimes hydrogen chloride acid, sometimes enzymes. The idea is you want to digest all the tissue, but you don't want to degrade the plastic, which can be tough. And then you analyze by FTIR, There's micro-Raman spectroscopy, hit particles with one wavelength of light, and you measure everything given off. Then there's the stimulated Raman, which is slower but way more precise. Hyperspectral dark field microscopy, which is actually pretty cool for looking at small particles. Gas chromatography mass spec with pyrolysis. We've even tried some Nile red fluorescent dye. But as I said, there's contamination issues. So, I'm good. So micronanoplastics, are they in human tissues? These aren't all of them, but these are several, showing that any tissue that they measured in, they find micronanoplastics. And I borrowed this slide from a colleague who's interested in reproductive development toxicology, so she also measured in the feces, breast milk, placenta, and meconium. And it's been found pretty much everywhere we've looked. So I'm going to show you two examples. In the brain, they took 3 tissues, liver, kidney, and brain, and they took samples collected in 2016 and 2024. They wanted to see if it varied between tissues, and they wanted to see if it varied over time. So liver's on the left, kidney's in the middle, and brain's on the right. And you can see that there's a big difference in the tissue burden of microplastics. Now, the liver and kidney, they're supposed to be the 2 organs that get rid of things, especially the liver. Especially the liver has cells that are made to grab particles out of the bloodstream. And you can see that it's lower, about the same as a kidney. And surprisingly, the brain had the largest level. Now, this is the one that's hit the press more than any other article, and this is from the lab of a friend and colleague. And I didn't even trust myself when I came up with this, that these plastics come up to be about 1% of the brain mass, which seems absurd. So I called my colleague Long Chi Chen to say, check my math. Because if you look at in the upper right, there's a couple individuals that are near 9,000 micrograms per gram of brain tissue, and that's 9 milligrams per gram. It's about just under 1% of the brain mass. Now, if you talk with Matt Campen, he said this was by GC mass spec pyrolysis method. There can be lipids in the brain, and the brain has lots of lipids, can give a false signal, and he has said, people, please repeat this. See what you can get. Don't disbelieve this. He gets attacked in the press, but if you read everything he says, he realizes contamination, interferences, chemical interferences may be causing these high levels. But he actually says he doesn't believe it because you see this wide range, orders of magnitude in the brain on the left, the blue circles, from 9,000 microgram per gram all the way down to about 200. So that he feels that shows there's an inter-individual difference. These are all different people, all these dots. So then the second human tissue study I want to talk about also hit the press, and they looked at carotid artery plaques. They got the plaque out because they were doing surgery, and they collected them, and they found that in the 304 patients, half of them had polyethylene that was detectable in their plaque. A mean concentration, 20 milligrams per gram. It seems like a lot. And that wasn't surprising. It could have been in any tissue, right? But what they did was they looked at these people, they looked at all the people that micronanoplastics were detected within the atheroma, and they found the risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, or death was 4.5 times higher than in patients where their plaque did not have any detectable micronanoplastics. So cause, effect, it's epidemiology, so it's associations. So we need studies to investigate if these findings are real. And people like me and others, we turn to rodent studies. So we can deliver relevant doses. We can transport the particles by inhalation or ingestion. We want to see if it gets to other tissues. And we can also do simple experiments giving different particle size of micronanoplastics and see if they influence where it goes. Does it go into the brain more or less if it's smaller? The brain has a blood-brain barrier, which is really there to protect and stop toxic particles and chemicals from getting in. And then the animal studies, you can see if toxicity is occurring at relevant exposure concentrations. So this is Phoebe Stapleton from Rutgers. She came up with this clever study. I already told you about the contamination problems and all the other things. We can't even imagine the rodent chow that they feed them. There's really nothing going on to make sure there's no plastic in there. So she came up with the idea to use this polyamide 12, which is a nylon, and she fed animals. Now she's a repro development tox lady, and she was interested in, if I have the mothers inhale a high single dose, is it in her tissues, and then is it in the pups? And unfortunately, she looked at maternal outcomes, fetal development, offspring health to adulthood. And I'm just going to present here. It's hard to see from where you guys are, but there are the shiny white particles are the micronanoplastics. This is in the pups at 2 weeks of age. So mom was pregnant, exposed to a high dose of micronanoplastics in nylon 12, and then 2 weeks after birth, they looked in the liver, kidney, heart, lung, and brain, and they found the micronanoplastic particles in all those tissues. So just briefly with NYU, I mentioned we collected 20 autopsy samples from the New York City medical examiner officer, and then we had 6 to 8 tissues from each donor. We digested it in potassium hydroxide, extracted it, and then we looked at the micronanoplastics on acetate filters by 2 methods. We stained it with Nile red, it turns fluorescent, and then Raman spectroscopy. And we sort of wanted to compare these 2 methods. These were 2 of the early methods used. And what we found, you can see probably, is there's a lot of fluorescent green in the lung, only 1 dot in the liver, and nothing in the formaldehyde blank, which we grabbed from the autopsy samples. So it appears, if the Nile red is specific, and I'm not sure it is, there's a lot of plastic particles in the lung of this individual. And then in the heart, this, I figured it was 35 or 50 micron-sized particle. Now remember, red cells are about 7 microns, and something that size is not supposed to get out of the capillaries or venules. And this large particle was found in the heart tissue, and this was one of the problems with size. So the master's student, she looked in a microscope. Whenever she saw a particle, she focused the Raman beam on there, and you can almost see on the right in the graph, the red line is the chemical standard for this chemical, and it matches up what the Raman spectroscopy was in the black line. Same thing here. This plastic makeup is different, but again, the red line and blue line do match up. So when we looked at it, in this initial study, 10 people and hearts, and you can see here, there were some particles in the formaldehyde blanks, but there were fluoropolymer, Prussian blue, polyacrylonitrile, polyamide, polypropylene. There were several different particles. Now, these are the only ones she could see and focus the Raman beam on. So what's still missing? So I'm going to end up here. So study replication, as Matt Campen said, are the plastic levels in the brain really that high? And I hope that's figured out. Particle size, this is my own personal, how can a large particle, 5 micron, get out of the lung or the GI tract and into the circulation, and then out of the circulation into tissues? It's for an inhalation guy, it's nonsensical because our nose filters out particles that are 5 to 100 microns. So we have filtering capacity in us. So then it's health. And this is where there's, unfortunately, the least data. Are adverse effects due to the inert plastic particles or the chemicals that leach out? It's probably both. And from what's seen in epidemiology studies in humans, is it a cause and effect? We don't know. Has anybody really been using environmentally relevant doses? Not that I'm aware of yet. Even in Phoebe Stapleton's study, she used a single high dose because she wanted her first study to be able to detect it in tissues before she goes to lower doses, which we are doing now. Communications of health effects, I brought that up. And then I'll be ending with, can we reduce the use of plastics and increase recycling? And then there's efforts, and even in this RFK Junior request for research, the third stage is to have a low-cost measurement and removal of plastics from the body. So I'm just going to present real quick, this is about the last slide, toxicity. So these are the major findings, and just underlined here. There's emerging risk for micro-nanoplastics and related to depression-related outcomes, and this has been done in epidemiology. Even in the eye, microplastics have been linked to oxidative stress, corneal thinning, and photoreceptor damage. Chronic lung exposure to microplastics induces systemic oxidative stress and inflammation. Brain, same thing, reactive oxygen species, microglial activation, increased inflammatory cytokines. And then in another feeding study, the anal genital distance was increased in females, decreased in males, and the males had tissue weights that were changed. Yes?
I assume those studies made an association as opposed to a cause and effect relationship.
Right. But I would say the animal studies, where the animals were treated only with that plastic particle, that'd be closer to cause and effect. But yes, for epidemiology, talk to Bob after about that.
But for now, please cover the mic because we want to capture your questions.
Oh.
And it's not as easy to do if there's someone else. So please
Yes, the question was, is it really cause and effect?
your questions so that we'll be able to put it up in your and this will be on our website soon after.
That's not on. Okay.
Okay, first question.
Whoa, wait, let me just finish real quick here.
Bob, you jumped into it too soon.
So I was told for the Institute, have some call to action. What can we do? And it's tough being a toxicologist and not bringing your work home, as few people in this row here will know. So I asked some colleagues what to do. So colleague number one, we'll say, she just had 2 babies in like a 4-year period. And I asked her, what would you do to reduce plastic use in your life? She said she changed all the dishes and stored containers of glass, stainless steel for the kids. She minimized carpet and drapes. She cleaned them as well as the sheets. When she was pregnant, she distilled her water. She never ate takeout food. We're talking New York City here. Air filters were going with HEPA filters all the time. Wet mopping and dusting. Buyed fresh or minimally packaged food. Tried to get it in glass. Chose natural fibers over plastic synthetic clothing. Stainless steel filters instead of the paper. No pods. Sippy cups with silicone instead of, it's no straws, not even paper ones. If takeout is unavoidable, she emptied it into real dishes as soon as possible. And she actually said it simply, sometimes I won't eat the layer that directly touched the plastic, depending on how much willpower I have that day. And of course, never reheat in plastic, no bottled water ever, and then wood cutting board and cooking utensils. And the second colleague that was brave enough to answer it, she leaves metal silverware in her office so she can have that available. Kids, everything metal. Declines plasticware when takeout. Pyrex for all food storage. Reusable water bottles and coffee mugs. She moved us to wood cutting boards. She actually is avoiding bamboo and end cut grains of cutting boards because she wasn't too confident about the glues and the adhesives used to put woods together. And I looked it up. I thought, oh, come on, this is horsehide glue, but actually it's some polyacrylate that's often used in these glues for wood. No plastic wrap, foil, ceramic nonstick pan. She said a bunch of friends all went to a thrift shop, bought a bunch of dishes that they share. So call to action, what can we do? There's easy things. Never use plastic bottles. Glass storage containers. Recycle all plastic. reusable grocery bags, air and water filtration, kitchen utensils and boards, never microwave plastic so your kids will end up like my kids did. And you could probably stop the trend. This was an interesting one for bottled soaps. And, you know, use bar soap. Don't use the plastic bottles, even though I guess they are refillable. Loose tea, if you want to avoid the plastic mesh that's on tea bags, I actually do rinse my bags before I heat them up in the microwave. No dishwasher pods, the polyvinyl chemical coating. Reduced plastic-containing condiments from takeout, no straws. But then there's less easy. Trying to buy all natural fiber clothes, that's tough. As I said, really recycling all the plastic, really using less plastic. I mean, we all have phones in our pockets that are made out of plastic. Purchase plastic things from recycled plastic. I like that idea. One of the suggestions, and I have I think I included the web link later, that plastic thing they put in the middle of pizza boxes to keep the top up, you know, refuse that. The earlier question, buy juice in glass or cardboard containers. I do wonder what these acidic things we're drinking when they're bought in plastic containers. Same with PB&J, glass before plastic. Wine bottles, they suggested, with natural cork instead of the plastic corks. Sponges and cloths in the kitchen. We've never thought about that. Dental floss. Gum supposedly has plastic in it. Sorry, Linda. And then build more recycled plastic statues on the grounds here. So Phoebe Stapleton said when she gives these talks, the biggest takeaway, though, is that we do what one can and have the means to. And I think we have to try a little more than that. So I want to thank funding from NIEHS and the CIEH at school, and Rebecca, Phoebe, Bejan, and Elise, who've been working with it. So any questions? And this is the Osprey down on below the hotel, all plastic. So questions?
Is there any clinical?
That's not on.
I guess, I don't know. Is there any clinical relationship between plastics in the brain and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's?
The question was, is there any clinical linkage between Alzheimer's, dementia-type things, and plastics in the brain? There is. That's one of the studies I saw. For cognitive ability, it was associated. I don't remember the exact percent increase in loss of cognitive function, but there is. But the earlier question, cause and effect, don't know. Yes.
Okay, you mentioned that water from your treatment plant, tap water, was safer for you than bottled water. And I get my bottled water from Culligan, thinking that I'm doing myself a better service than drinking it out of the tap, which sometimes around here smells like chlorine. So what's the best way to proceed on that?
I can confidently say I don't know the answer to that. Because as a scientist, to me, every bottle that Culligan sends out could be different. The pH of the water they filled it with, the condition of the filtering system they used to fill it up that day. These things change so much. And that's why one of the guys, Bejan Yan, is our chemist. He drives us crazy because he wants everything super precise. So when we get water, filtered water, sterile, 18 mega ohms, no ions water in the lab, it's all plastic filters and plastic lines coming to us. It's hard to do. So we're going to do a study looking at the IV fluids in bags used in the hospitals. How many different bags, how many different fluids in the bags, how many different IV lines, manufacturers are we going to have to test?
You know, we heat those up too.
Pardon?
We'll heat up those bags.
You heat up the IV bags? Wow. Yes, to get them to body temperature. So the bags are heated for IV, okay.
So
We'll include
basically,
that in the study. Yes.
It's just a crapshoot. You take your chance.
I think it's a crapshoot, but you do what you can. So don't buy bottled water, and you have this the
So I do
surface
buy
area.
It's too late for you anyway.
It's never too late.
I had a couple of maybe suggestions. It seems like it would be relatively easy to track that down. You know, like in other words, take a given bottled water and test the water at its source at the well. Test it after it comes into the plant, after it's through these plastic pipes, and test it before it goes into the bottle and after it goes into the bottle, so you know whether those nanoplastics are coming from the bottle itself or from the water, and you could sort of pinpoint it.
That's what a scientist would do, but
Yeah,
at $200 or $300 per sample for measurement,
yeah.
it could be
Well,
expensive.
and
And would you
here's
want to do that every week?
Here's another one that occurred to me, because you said that the nanoplastics, you know, are in the body in such and such a quantity. To me, it seems like the question is exactly where is the damage coming from? Is it the breakdown products, the styrene, you know, what exactly is the damage? Or is some of it from the physical aspects of a particle itself? And, you know, like, I don't know, what ran through my mind is to put on any given plastic kind of a half-life like you have for radioactive particles. That, in other words,
That's part of our grant. Don't pass it around.
Okay.
This one lady,
Anyway,
she
just
radio
a couple
labels,
of, you know,
people
avenues
radio
to-
label plastic particles.
to track it down a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah.
First, thank you for this great talk today. I was curious about the study related to the liver, kidney, and brain data revealing levels of plastics. And I know you mentioned one potential data contamination around lipids in the brain in terms of measurement, but I was curious if there are other explanations, because the first thing that came to mind for me is we have the liver and kidney, which are designed for filtration, in the brain with this incredibly sophisticated blood-brain barrier. Are there other explanations potentially, or thoughts on why the levels are so high in the brain?
I don't have any off the top of my head. I mean, it's too amazing that the blood-brain barrier doesn't prevent these particles from getting in. Now, when they take the samples, when someone does an animal study, one flushes out the blood, because you don't want to, when you take a liver, you don't want to measure what's in the blood. You want to measure only what's in the liver tissue. So, of course, with these brain samples that they got from autopsies, the blood wasn't flushed out. So maybe particles got trapped in the brain.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And then what part of the brain? So we're going to try and put together a study. I think Matt Campen is sampling different sections of the brain, see where the particles, if they differ.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I had a question about the studies you mentioned showing a 4.5-fold increased risk of heart attack and stroke in those people who had microplastics in their atheromas. And I wonder if those studies controlled for the total atheromatous burden, because the more atheroma you have, the more likely you ought to have a stroke or heart attack. So if you compare someone who has a lot of atheroma and microplastics to someone who doesn't have much atheroma and will maybe have fewer microplastics, that really doesn't tell you very much unless you control for total plaque burden.
Right. So we could sit down after and look at that study, because there could be other things. I don't know if they controlled for socioeconomic status, even age, all those things. I don't know if they could. I would bet they would, to publish a study like that.
Thanks.
But multiple atheromas, I've never seen anybody put that in an epi study.
I think it's still, in my mind anyway, as a cardiologist, it's unclear what degree increased risk there might be from microplastics and atheroma until plaque burden especially is really carefully controlled for.
Yeah.
this may have been addressed 2 questions ago, but to make it absolutely spot on for me, is it possible that this brain concentration could be just capillaries and not actually having crossed the barrier?
That's what I think, because it wasn't flushed out. Yes.
Thank you very much. One of the things that hit me in listening to you is that a lot of this is also age-related in how long you've been living and accumulating these things. And now, fortunately, many of us here aren't going to be accumulating a lot more.
Right.
But when we were young, there weren't plastic bottles. That we were lucky in that there weren't as many plastic. But now for our kids and our grandkids, it's more they're accumulating over life problem. So how do we focus on them rather than, I'm not worried about nanoplastics killing me. I've got 17 other things that will do that. But how do we get the focus on the younger generations?
Well, I showed you with the colleague who had 2 infants, what she did, and that was a lot. I was surprised. But as I said, there's easy things, but the tough things, electronics. I'm not sure how we could do that. I've read some toothpaste have microplastics. It's
Like putting this to my ear.
Yeah.
I have hemochromatosis, which is
I couldn't hear you.
I have hemochromatosis, which is iron overload because my liver does not get the iron out of the blood as it should. Is there any relationship between that and nanoplastics? Anybody looked at that yet?
I've seen nothing on that.
Yeah, okay. Not surprised, but
No.
But thank you.
I mean, it's really in the infancy as far as toxicity and epi studies, so.
Great talk, thank you so much. I'm wondering from a lab practices perspective, how realistically can we remove plastic contamination? Because I think I'd have to completely rebuild the lab from the roots up in order to get plastic out of the bench.
Yes, and for our studies, that's actually what we said we're going to do. So we're going to now work with the pathologists who have 2 cadavers per week from the hospital. And so my colleagues went crazy. Okay, the body bags, which are plastic, to prevent fluid leakage, we're going to have to switch to natural fibers. The cutting board, they always use plastic. We're going to switch. Everything will be the same. For animal studies, animals are housed in polycarbonate disposable cages usually.
Right.
And the feed, you get what you get from the manufacturer. So I'm not sure how that's, they restrict using stainless steel wire cages for critters. So it's going to be tough. And the water provided to the animals or to whatever you're using. So it's doable to make it. And we've just gone to the point where, okay, we'll do the best we can.
Right.
Because we can't make it plastic free.
Thanks.
Again, thanks for your talk. But I had a very practical question on what we can do. And this one's bothered me for a while since I read a New York Times article several years ago about what really happens to the plastics that we think we are recycling. And so I was kind of I was a little bit questioning why you would recommend continuing to recycle plastic when only 10% of it is recyclable. Because I think that we feel, I know I have a lot of friends, I'm staying with one right now, who feels like as long as she's recycling plastic, things are okay, which means that then she doesn't think about, and I don't think about, like with the other things, buying things in non-plastic containers. I don't think it's realistic to think that we're going to stop plastic manufacturing in this country, but I think that if there was more information about what really happens to recycled plastics, people would become more aware that what they're recycling isn't really being recycled and reused because it's cheaper to make plastic anew than it is to recycle it.
I have this argument with my wife about once a month because I tend to throw everything in there, and she says, no, that's not allowed. Yes, makes me feel good. But that's why I sort of compared it to the tobacco industry, because they're pushing their product. So the chemical plastic manufacturers, they're going to keep making it until the demand goes down. I don't understand the recycling at all, because to me, if you separate out the plastics, it should be cheaper to do that than getting oil out of the ground and just distilling it. So, yes.
PFAS, are you including that when you talk about stuff? And the second thing is do municipalities check for that after they process the water? Every year you get from your city, this is what's in your water. Are they checking for PFAS, plastics?
I've only looked at a few municipal chart data tables, and I haven't seen that in there.
So they're not checking it?
I don't think so. Only researchers are.
I also want to thank you for a beautiful talk. I read a piece about 2 weeks ago in one of the print media publications about a service that offers to filter your blood now to take out microplastics. And people are actually paying out of pocket to have this done, and they're saying it cuts them about a half. Should we all be thinking about doing this in the near future?
I have to know how they're doing it. I mean, as I said, the plastic particles can be the same size as blood cells. So how are they getting those out and not the smaller platelets or the red cells or white cells?
I can't answer that, but I can only say that the publication indicated that they reduced it by about 50%. Might be.
Oh, okay, so they take the blood out, and there's different densities between cells and plastics. Plastics are lighter, centrifuge it off. Okay.
Does reverse osmosis get the plastics out of the water?
Yes, I'm pretty sure the pore size of the material they use for the reverse osmosis, but I'm pretty sure it's a plastic material, membrane that only lets water.
And it filters too.
Yeah.
All right, so my second question is kind of addressed by this blood issue. Do they currently have a way to test what nanoplastics are in your body when you're still alive?
Well, feces, urine, and blood they can take simply.
But do they? I mean, like you can test for your cholesterol and your sugar levels. Does anybody test for your plastic levels?
I think maybe the people who do the blood filtering technique, those labs. Again, it's a couple $100 or more per sample, and then you need blanks. It's doable, but I don't know if anybody really doing it. And so they are making really simple things that you can pay for, but I don't believe any of those things on the internet. We laugh at them. Yes.
Thank you so much for this talk. I've been coming to Chautauqua for a long time and wondering when the plastic issue is going to be addressed. And I'm a small business owner, and so we've reduced our plastics greatly. So I just wanted to give a call out to action that people can take is pressure businesses to switch over to plastics. It does work. Decades ago, people started questioning us, and so we just made the shift. So I just wanted to put that out there. Amazon, shipping in plastic and pressuring them.
Well,
and
they are
other
switching to
large,
it.
big companies.
We get takeout from this Chinese restaurant for 20 plus years, and they know me. I always refuse the utensils and the plastic soy sauce, but I never thought to tell them, hey, you guys should consider not doing this.
Yeah, and I've gone around my town where I live to pressure people, or I refuse to take plastic, so that's something we can do.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if you or anybody here has had experience with a company called Ridwell. It's a nationwide company that it's pretty new, and they claim that they're recycling plastics at a 90% rate or higher. You have to package your plastic and mail it in, and there is a small charge. But it seems from what I've seen of the company, and you can check them out on ridwell.com, that they've developed a process where they identify specific types of plastic, and they have very companies that they send it to who use it. They actually do recycle it.
It sounds doable. I haven't heard of them, but chemists are quite creative. I'm pointing to my brother. They're quite creative and they could do this, but the thought of packaging yourself in something and then shipping it, which is fossil fuel.
So far, it's just more the film plastic and the multi-layer plastic, so it's like snack bags and Ziploc bags and that type of thing.
Many grocery stores are taking those now.
They send you the bag to... But they, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Someone else.
I want to thank Terry, but also answer that last question about Ridwell. I see, is Caroline still here? Caroline Van Kirk just approached me before the talk saying that she has, is going to be collecting plastics through Ridwell, and we'll put an announcement in the Grapevine and also on the Chautauquan for Sustainability website. So look, if you're on the Grapevine, look for an email about where you can drop off your plastics for the Ridwell recycling.
My name is Bob Hopper, and I'm nominally the president of this Chautauqua Science Group. Bob Spiritus is vice president and program manager. And we really appreciate that. Obviously, what we're doing is hitting a certain bell that's ringing for some of us. I would like to just, on my behalf, caution all of us not to be so afraid that we have made progress. I grew up in LA in the 50s. I couldn't go out and play because I'd cough so bad. And we did manage to clean up the air in Los Angeles through a combination of government and private action. There are other things that have worked. They take time. And one of the things that we can do right here is keep our lake clean, keep our lake alive. And it's right here. And it's one of the things that Mark is doing. And let's all help him. And we hope to see you again next week. We'll have a program equally as exciting and interesting. And it takes a little bit of money for us to do this. And we have a donation basket in the back. If you enjoy coming here and doing this, we don't want, tinkling doesn't help us, folding helps. So thank you very much, and we'll see you. Yeah. They're on YouTube. They're all on YouTube. Go to YouTube and then go to Chautauqua Science, and you'll get it. And eventually, they get saved, and so you will, in time, be able to see the charts and read them. And it is a dilemma in that I used to be in charge of a training program, and I would tell people, sit 20 feet away and look at your own charts. And nobody does that. They look at them on their screen and they look brilliant. They never are. So we will keep reminding people, like 12 words on a slide is about the most anybody can see. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you.